Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys all for jumping on the webinar. A little background, my name is Robert Bailey. You can't see me on the camera, but I'm a vice president at Hapara. I've been in ed tech for over 15 years now. I started shortly before the 2008 financial crisis hit, and so this is now kind of my second recession depression that I've gone through within education. And as many of you guys know who lived through the last one, it's the first year it doesn't necessarily impact education. It's the second and third year that there's this hangover within education budgets as we look to realign and kind of set a new standard. So I know that it's very uncertain right now, but there's a lot of people out there who've been through this before. And we will recover and we will come through it, but education will likely change, and the way that we look at education, the way that we deliver it, has been forced to change here in the last couple of months, and it looks like, according to a lot of the reports that are out there, will continue to need to be changed well into fall and winter, as COVID does not appear to be going away anytime soon. I've been with Hapara now for 4 years. For those of you who this is your first time interacting with Hapara, we're an educational technology tool that was originally founded down in the island of New Zealand, country of New Zealand, and we help schools that are using G Suite bring visibility into the work that students are doing. So we now have offices at 4 locations across the country. I'm based out of Chicago, and we've got about 2.2 million users worldwide right now that we work with on a daily basis. I don't want to talk too much about Hapara though and about our tool. I want to talk about the issue that's facing us right now. So in terms of agenda for today's call, we're going to do a little bit of a discussion on the current reality, talk about the need for schools, especially classrooms right now, to be as flexible as possible, and then some strategies and solutions as you look to identify and eliminate expenses with the looming budget cuts that are most likely coming. Again, please feel free, if you've got a question, if you want me to go into more detail, if you've got an idea, please contribute, and it'll make this all the better for everybody who's watching and listening from home. So as you know, despite the fact that it's a cute graphic, there's nothing cute right now about COVID and what's going on in the world, and we're living in a new reality. It's interesting working at Hapara. We were having conversations with schools in January about upcoming budget cycles and what next year is going to look like. And come February, March, all of that changed. Everybody went home. Teachers were completely thrown for a loop. Schools were thrown for a loop, and we live in a very, very different time that requires new strategy, that requires us to take a new outlook on things, and that really requires us to be very creative in how we approach some of these different problems that we're facing. No secret to anyone in education, there's going to be budget cuts, and they're looming. The CARES Act, which was announced federally, has got some good funding in it that will temporarily help schools, but most likely for the 2021-2022 school year, there's going to be some significant reductions, just based on the fact that so much of education funding comes from the state level, and especially in states like New York or Illinois, which I'm in right now, which are particularly hit by COVID due to being international airport hubs. There's going to have to be cuts. And so right now is the time that I encourage you as schools and as teachers and as technical directors to really start focusing in trying to determine what tools do we have, or what tools do we need that are going to have the biggest impact on our teachers and our students, and are going to give us the best flexibility to be able to teach both in maybe a different type of classroom environment with a reduced student count, but then also from home at the same time. 2 years ago in the United States, ed tech accounted for about $56 billion in education spending. It's gone up since then. It'll likely dip a little bit, but that's $56 billion fits into one of 3 different categories. Infrastructure, so things like Wi-Fi and connectivity and making sure that people have access. Hardware, so that's the distribution of Chromebooks and iPads and whatever other devices students and teachers are using. And then software. The CARES Act is going to fund these three categories. Specific to software, it's going to fund learning management systems, which we'll talk about further in a little bit. I'm not going to focus on infrastructure and hardware. For the most part, school districts have a very clear plan for going one-to-one or partially going one-to-one, or are rapidly going to be forming them in the next little while, and making sure that students have connectivity at home and in school to make sure that there's an equity there's equity among students. I'm going to focus in on software just because that's been my area of expertise as we look for possible ways to reduce cost and create better at-home learning environments. So one of the biggest things is, despite all of this, despite the COVID and despite the situation, app fatigue for teachers is an incredibly real problem. It's estimated teachers use between 50 and 75 different apps within their classroom and within their teaching, which is an incredible number. I was at ISTEA a couple of years ago in Denver talking to a couple of teachers who happened to be Hapara customers, and she turned to me and she said, I'm really excited to start using Hapara this year. I said, oh, that's great. I said, your school district's been using it for about 3 years now. I said, are you new there? She said, no, I've been here for 25 years. She goes, I've been here long enough to know that after 3 years, it's a tool that we're going to keep, so I should probably learn how to use it. And I found that funny because it's true. There's an app a day to solve a different problem, and if you look at the current environment for applications, about a quarter of them are games. Second is business. Only third to which is education. So education accounts for about 9% of apps that are out there on the market, and there's just an incredible mass amount of different things for teachers and schools and principals to be able to play with that are going to solve different problems. But the problem is that if there's too many of them, or if there's no training on any of them, it's not solving any of those problems. It's creating a bigger headache for teachers. And so that's one of the pieces that we really need to focus in on, is how do we reduce the amount of time that teachers spend doing things that are not instruction. It was estimated in a recent study that 52% of teachers' time is spent doing things that doesn't involve instruction. And so more than half of their time is not doing what teachers signed up to do in the first place, which is teach kids and make a difference. And so over the past few years, the idea has been, well, if we create technology, that'll help alleviate the problem. But what we've seen is it's actually created in many places more headaches than anything, because teachers are ill-equipped or ill-trained on the software that school districts are deploying, and therefore it just creates more problems, more time, more bureaucracy for the teacher. So another thing that, as we start to look at how we're going to identify which tools to cut in the coming year, or where we may be able to save money, is to start and look at it. Is this really making our teachers' lives easier? And if it's not making your teacher's life easier, or it's not radically improving the instruction of students, then I highly encourage you to take a look at it and consider cutting it from your stack or your technology stack in the upcoming year. So there's a bunch of different tools out there. One of the ways that the industry is looking to address app fatigue is that companies are buying up a bunch of the different apps. So you have this all-in-one solution. So a good example of that would be PowerSchool, which is a great company, really well funded, and is recently, through the purchase of Schoology and Haiku and a number of other ed tech companies out there, they're trying to create this environment where a school or a district can come to them and they can solve every single one of their problems without ever leaving that environment. And the only caution that I have there is that, first of all, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best at solving that individual problem that you're looking to address. And the second thing is that for those of you guys that have been in education for a long time, the power that publishers yielded, over the last 40 or 50 years, as they bought up more and more of the curriculum resources, they became the power brokers within education. And so it's also important that we make sure that we continue to keep this balance within education, because I think that that's the amazing thing that ed tech has been able to provide, which is choice for school districts, so that they can go out and source different things. And that also results in a much lower price because there's more competition within the market. So how do we decide? How do we cut costs? What things should we be looking at? And that's the next question. And so This is my decision-making framework. I encourage you as a school or as a district to sit down and create your own decision-making framework. And I find it interesting in working with schools because they're very thorough when it comes to purchasing a tool in the first place. There's a number of different steps. So at Hapara, we always go in, we'll do a test with the school where they'll run a pilot in a couple of their different classes. They'll collect feedback. They'll decide whether or not that the tool on a wider scale will have an impact. And then we'll look at signing a 2-3 year contract so that we can go in there and make sure that we have an impact. But the thing that I find is that schools are not nearly as diligent at sitting down and making those decisions on tools that they have already bought. There's a number of different tools likely in your tech stack, which are either redundant because of new tools that you've bought or no longer solve a need that is critical for your district. But because of the way that we're structured and because it takes so long to make those decisions, a lot of those tools will stay in your renewal framework for a number of years, and you'll end up buying them for many more years than you need to. So I would highly encourage you to build a framework not only for new technology, but also for technology that you're looking at renewing. So the very first question that I think that we need to ask ourselves when we're making these types of decisions is, does it align with my school or district strategic mission? And this one's really important. One of the tools that we have at Hāpara is called Highlights, and it's a monitoring tool. And at Hāpara, we think it's very important to practice ethical monitoring, and we think that it's critical that we build students' digital citizenship skills. We think that's important. That for us helps direct our development efforts on the product. Certain schools and certain districts, that's part of their mission. Developing digital citizens and making sure that students are prepared for the world after school is a critical component to what they do. So this is an example of where that piece should help you decide what tool on the market you want to go out and be affiliated with, because certain tools help and align better to your mission than others do. The second is, does the company or vendor provide you data to show that the tool is being used? It's probably the most talked about thing in EdTech news right now is, the estimated amount of money spent on licenses that are not used for education tools. And at the end of the day, as a school or as a district, you need to demand better from the vendor. You need to be provided with the information that shows you whether or not that tool is being used so that you can make the decision of whether or not you want to renew it in the coming year. The one piece that I would caution you with this is that you need to sit down and say, what is good usage to me? On our daily lives, we'll use things like Instagram, which I probably open up way more times than I should, 30, 40 times a day. In the classroom, you may have a tool that you only open once a week, but is critical to the work that teachers are doing. So it's really important that you get feedback from the vendor on how much the tool is being used, but that you also take that and contextualize it to what you're hoping to solve with that tool that you've purchased. If the tool's not being used or it's only being used by a couple of teachers, when things get tight, those should be the first things that you look to eliminate. The third factor should be, does the vendor have any sort of plan to train and support your teachers? We live in a world where we hope to develop products that someone can walk into and they intuitively understand how to use, and they just use it. And you hear that all the time from products when I ask, is there training? Well, really, you don't really need training. It should be intuitive. You should be able to jump in there and just understand it. And I think that's not necessarily fair to your teachers. One thing that is that teachers all have a different level of technical understanding. They all come from a very different place. I got my start in EdTech 15 years ago at conferences helping teachers turn on their Wi-Fi on their computers so that they could access tools. We've come a long ways since then, but there's still a full spectrum of teachers who struggle with devices, all the way through to people who we could probably hire at Hāpara to be developers for us. So it's important that the vendor has a plan that meets those teachers where they are and helps them understand the tool. Otherwise, you're gonna release the tool and it'll just you may have every best intention in the world. It may solve every problem that you need, but if teachers don't know how to use it or haven't been properly trained, it'll fall flat. And especially during today's day and age where everything's done from a distance now, or at least it has been for the last 65 days, uh, it's really a good time to start looking at those vendors that are able to provide virtual support for your teachers that don't have to come in for a full professional learning day. So one of the things that we've done at Hapara in the last couple of years is we've built out a Hapara certification program, which puts all of our teachers from all over the world into cohorts and helps them understand not just how to technically use the tool, but how to apply it to education, best practice. So that's something that you want to make sure that your vendor's offering you. If they're not, then there's likely better value that you can find somewhere else. The fourth thing is, and probably is the most important, is will it impact learning? And again, those are all the studies that are coming out right now are saying that we've put one-to-one technology in the classroom, but it's not actually moving the needle on instruction. And so a lot of that is we bought the device and we expected teachers to just know how to use it and to know how to teach with it. And what we found is that it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's not just about the device. You have to have the software and the tools and provide that information to the teachers in order for it to start changing practice. Because the device doesn't change practice, teachers change the practice. Will it save your teachers time? Again, we talked about that earlier. If 51% of the time is not spent doing instruction, then your technology better save teachers' time. It better not be an additional burden that you're putting on the backs of teachers. And then can we afford it, and is it necessary to have? I always encourage schools to kind of rank their tools from the most important tool that we absolutely have to have. So maybe say your student information system, your SIS, something that we could not live without, so we have to have it, down to the supplemental, resources that are great to have, but may not be absolutely critical to, to teaching and learning. Someone commented that one of the big things that they're looking at here is usage, and that it's challenging because there's no standard for how companies are providing usage. And I think that that's a really good point. Hapara has an analytics tool that we use currently, and it's a component of our suite, and it'll tell you whether or not students are writing within Google. Some of the feedback that we've gotten is it doesn't necessarily give me the complete picture. It doesn't tell me what apps students are using. It doesn't tell me if they're surfing other websites. It doesn't tell me if they're on Nearpod. And that's absolutely true. The difficulty is, and we're guilty of this in business, is that sometimes we spend so much time trying to collect data that we never actually analyze and execute on that data. So the data, for the most part, you'll never have a complete perfect picture of what's being used and exactly the impact that it's having. But what I encourage you to do is just you have to pick a number and use that as your baseline, and pick something that you're hoping to influence. So it might be increasing teachers' formative feedback to students, and so that might be the one piece that you want to focus on in the upcoming few months. And then pick a tool, like an analytics tool at Hapara that shows you whether or not teachers are giving formative feedback, and then use that as your baseline. Wrap your professional learning around it, and then in 2 to 3 months, go back and review it. There's another great tool out there. Catch On is a good tool that I've had some experience with, which shows you different app usage. And about every single ed tech company out there right now is trying to solve that problem for you. Clever's got something that they're coming out with, and so everyone has data. At the end of the day, it's not the data that's important, it's how you interpret that data, and it's the action that you take based on that data.
We have a question,
Absolutely.
Robert. All right, it says, do districts get feedback from students?
Do districts get feedback from students? That's a good question. In terms of like what the students are using, or how the students are, like what they think is having the biggest impact on them?
Yes, she says yes.
Yeah. I would be fascinated if anyone else in the conversation has a mechanism that they use to get student feedback. I think that that's really important. I hadn't necessarily, I don't know of a district that does a detailed student analysis on, their feedback on different tools. So that would be something that I might look to add to the framework. If you were looking to do it kind of inexpensively, creating, a Google survey within your district and sending it out to the students would be really useful. It's become a very good survey tool actually, and it's free. And then there's also some other paid resources out there that allow you to do teacher and student surveying that would get you that kind of information as well.
Thanks.
Awesome. So once you have that decision-making framework, another place to look at in terms of identifying places to save money is by looking at places where you have a redundancy. And I'm going to talk about Hapara for a second because that's who I work for. But we had a school district in the Southern Hemisphere, large one, and they'd been using Hapara for a number of years. They particularly used our differentiated workspace tool. And we went down there to kind of have a conversation with them to see how things were going. And one of the questions that we always ask is, like, what needs are you looking at filling right now? And they told us that they had just purchased a tool that would allow them visibility into what students are doing on their Chromebooks. Well, that's interesting because you know that's a major component of what Hapara is. Our highlights tool, which you already are paying for, is probably the industry leader in showing you what students are doing on Chromebooks. Well, they were shocked. They hadn't talked to their teachers to find out that it was something that they were already using, that they already had, and they ended up buying a secondary tool and wasting money because they now have duplicates. And so that's something that we see a lot of in schools, is that you'll have a filter that does that does some monitoring on the side. You'll have an instructional tool that does some monitoring, or you'll have Hapara, which has a LMS component to it, and you'll have Schoology, which also has an LMS component to it. And so one of the things that we encourage, in this new reality where you're looking to save money, is to start to look at the overlap of your tools and multi-purpose your tools and eliminate the ones that aren't necessary. So specific to Hapara, a few of the different areas, and we're an interesting mix of tools because there's really nobody else on the market that does the different things that we do. But a few of the areas where you can start to look for redundancies is Hapara with our highlights tool gives you real-time monitoring of students. And particularly when you're at a distance, this is a tool that is incredibly valuable. Not to sit there and look at the different tabs students have open all day long. That's not a good use of your teacher's time. They're not babysitters. But to jump into the activity viewer, which is going to give you a detailed analysis of all the different sites that students visited during a specific period of time or during the day, then you can go in there, make sure that your students were on task, jump in where necessary, and hopefully in particular, reach out to those students who were on task and provide that positive feedback that they're looking for. Because in a lot of homes, that's not something necessarily right now that they're getting. The other piece is that learning management side of things. We call it Workspace at Hapara, and for us, it's a differentiated learning instructional tool. And so, you might use Schoology or you might use something like Canvas, but for us, we have what we deem kind of an LMS light system within the Hapara framework, because LMSs were originally and traditionally built to solve college needs. They were built for college instructors where they would lecture for 3 hours a week and then send students home and push out content to them and push out assignments to them. And K-12 is very different, and especially in the younger grades, that's not necessarily how students learn. So what we've done with Workspace is we've created an environment that allows you to differentiate between different groups and tee up different content really easily. We've got some schools in New York right now specifically in New York City, where they're writing their lessons because they're being done from home. In K3, they have their lessons in both English, and then they also have a version for the English language learners that's in Spanish. So they give the parents in Spanish the directions on how to guide that student learning. It's really important. It's very easily done by grouping. And so it's not that kind of one size fits all content that you're pushing from a distance. Make sure that you have that professional learning and training piece in place, and make sure that your vendor, which we do at Hapara specifically, is not just training on the tool, that they're also training on best practice. Because right now, teachers are desperate for best practice when it comes to that hybrid classroom model or teaching from a distance. And so make sure that you reach out to your vendors that do offer professional learning and capitalize on those opportunities. And then the final component that we're excited to start talking about at Hapara is our content piece. So, as we talked about, or as I already talked about, we spend about $56 billion on technology every year within schools. That doesn't include the $9 billion that we spend on curriculum. And 2 years ago, of that $9 billion that was spent on curriculum, $3 billion of that was spent on online curriculum. And it's grown dramatically in the last 2 years. And I can only imagine in the last 2 months, it's hockey sticked from that point. So there's a lot of different content, and as a district, you can end up spending a lot of money on different content, be it from a publisher or be it from very specific different online providers, a primary math tool all the way through to a secondary English tool. Hapara, we see the need for content that specifically aligns to learning standards that's open and available for everybody. So we began a project of aligning more than 12,000 online workspaces that our teachers have developed to the core curriculum. So by July, you'll be able to go in and search curriculum standards and be teed up with a number of different workspaces that directly meet that hopefully are differentiated for different levels of understanding that you can copy over and quickly and easily use with your students with very little effort. One of the pieces that's key in this new era that we're living in is that teachers were hired to teach. They were not hired to be online content providers. And that's one of the issues that a lot of schools and districts are running into. And that right now, because there's so much uncertainty, there's a lot of understanding on the behalf of parents, that we couldn't see this coming. We weren't prepared for this. So schools are doing the very best that they can to teach from afar and to keep kids on task. Come the fall, if we are back in the classroom, it's very, very unlikely. The chances are is that we will be in some sort of a hybrid classroom, or we'll still be teaching students from a distance. The expectation will be that we've solved the problem by then, that we're better prepared, that we're able to execute on our teaching and learning from a distance. And so one of the keys is in looking at your digital strategy is ensuring, do you have that content piece in place? And sitting back and expecting your teachers to go on and write full online lessons is, I think, is in many cases a task that's too tall. And so what we're hoping to do with our content piece is to harness the power of teachers from around the world and bringing that content and allowing teachers to share amongst each other, with no additional cost. So one of the areas, we've talked a little bit about Hapara. If you're interested in learning more about that, I would love for you to reach out to us. We're running a special right now for those affected by COVID, which is now everybody. You go to hapara.com/from-home. We're going to give you free access to the tool to be able to use it within your school or within your district to hopefully solve some of those temporary short-term needs that you have. And we'd love to have a longer-term discussion for you about what it looks like to move into a flexible learning model. And at Hapara, we've been doing that for the last 7 years. We've always viewed learning as something that will move to being hybrid and that needs to be flexible over time. And so that's what we've been developing, and that's what we've been looking, hoping to move our tool to. And so in the last few months, it's been interesting for us because we've gotten incredibly busy as the world's changed and started to align to the pieces that that we feel are critically important. If you're interested in learning more about the content project that I was talking about, hapara.com/power-awesome-learning is the place to go for that. There's great content there. You can click on them and see them, but the best thing to do is to get access to it so you can hop in, copy, share, change, put your students in. And again, we're running, we're here for you guys in this time of need. So we're more than happy to get you access to that tool as well. So if you don't have access, or you're a school or a district who's not currently using Workspace but is using some of the other components of Hapara, I would highly recommend that you take a look at it when you're trying to make your purchasing decisions. Tools like Schoology and Canvas, they cost on average about $10 per student per year. Content tools run $20 to $25 per student to specific subjects. Monitoring tools that are out there on the market are $6 to $7 per student. With Hapara, our goal is to have a solution that helps teachers with all of those, aligns directly with teachers' workflow and helps them with specifically with that 51% of the time that they're not spending instructing. And so the most expensive Hapara ever is $5.95 per student per year. And based on size of your school and length of the contract, it just goes down from there. So as you're looking to eliminate costs, as you're looking to be more flexible in the approach that you're taking, please take some time, take a look at Hapara. I'm more than happy to walk you through the tool specifically myself. Are there any questions or thoughts or ideas or areas where we might be able to make some additional technology eliminations that I may have missed? Lindsay, you've specifically been a classroom teacher. Is there anything that you would add to that?
One thing, and I was just kind of thinking more along the lines of the workspace content that you were just talking about. This is an initiative we already have teachers sharing their workspaces publicly. And so we've kind of launched this initiative to encourage that more. And we're putting in the work to curriculum align all of those workspaces. So the idea is that any teacher could access content that he or she needs through Workspace. So you have the content and the tool to deliver it. And I just think it's great because it gives, if I were still in the classroom, it would give me a way to collaborate with teachers on the other side of the world, expose my students to different ways of thinking. And it's kind of all right there. Like, you don't really need another tool when you have Workspace, because you can automate differentiation and you have the content and you have the way to push it out to students. So, I mean, because I've worked with LMSs before when I did online teaching, and a lot of them, and like you said, they're really not built for K-12. A lot of them are super clunky and hard to learn and hard to use, and they're hard for everybody, like for the teachers and the students. So that's something I would really urge tech directors and administrators to think about, is definitely ease of use. Because, getting over that barrier of just kind of getting everybody where they need to be online is a huge barrier, especially right now.
Perfect. Absolutely. And I think that content is probably the biggest barrier right now in a lot of ways. You can have the structure and the tool, but that only does so much. So Google Classroom works great with Workspace because it's a phenomenal tool for distributing assignments and for posting updates that get sent to the kids and to the parents. But it doesn't have the content side. It doesn't have the teaching and learning side. So that's where, when paired with Workspace, it really becomes that complete modern learning LMS that districts are looking for. My only final thought before I jump off, if we don't have any other questions, is that, particularly in the early .com era and then during the housing crisis, one of the things that I would make sure to consider when you're looking at technology and you're evaluating tools is take a look at the stability of the company as well. A number of schools and districts had unfortunate run-ins with some technology tools that that weren't able to survive those those difficult times and survive the crisis. And so using tools like Crunchbase and that sort of thing to look into the financial stability of companies is really important. Hapara has been around for 8 years now. We've stood the test of time. If companies have been around for more than 5 years, they're probably in a good position to be able to continue servicing you for the next few years as we look at an economic downturn. I think the good news is not to end it on a downer with saying that the economy is in a tough place. I think that the good news is we will most likely in the next 3 years see education change at a more rapid pace than we've seen in probably 80 years. And so it's a fascinating time for educators and for ed tech companies alike. And so we look forward to continuing to partner with schools and districts to help you through this time. And if you've got questions, even if we're not working with you, more than happy to jump on and see if we can help identify some areas where you may have overlap within your apps and the different tools that you're using right now as you look to scale back your budgets, or look to purchase new tools that may supplement some of those existing resources. Again, my name's Robert. I really appreciate the time that you've all taken to listen to this webinar, and hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy from home. Thank you very much.